Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to wait just another 30 seconds for people to filter in. My name is Nora Benavides. I'm here with PEN America. I'm here with my colleagues from Georgia, including Tracy Powell from the Racial Equity Journalism Fund at Borealis Philanthropies. We are so thrilled to have all of you tonight for our evening discussion about elections and emotions. To kick us off, I want to just briefly set the stage. I think that this is an absolutely unprecedented election season. So many people say, well, it's going to be like 2000, or we have to be ready for whatever came in 2016 and for the shock of results to come through. And I simply think that it is going to be unlike any of those. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We have seen massive and sustained social movement over the summer through the George Floyd protests. This is a year that I think there is going to be so much intensity, a rise in mail-in ballots, which means that we may see delays in election results. I think that during that time, there will be a rampant period for misleading content, what we might even call misinformation, to thrive. And what we want to be able to do with our partners here tonight is talk with all of you about what's at stake and why it's so important to identify and know who our trusted voices are. And so I'm so thrilled. We have some absolutely amazing partners here tonight. First, I just want to give a shout out to Tracy Powell from the Racial Equity in Journalism Fund at Borealis Philanthropies. She is logging on right now, I believe, so she's having a bit of a problem, but she has been my partner in crime in putting this event together. And as someone that lived and worked in Georgia, I know that Georgia matters. Georgia has been overlooked in national storytelling. It has been overlooked in so many ways. And so I'm excited to spotlight everything all of you are doing tonight on my screen. And so a big shout out to our partner, Atlanta Voice. Of course, we have our additional co-sponsors. You wanna give a wave, Janice? Janice is on mute, but she's saying hello. And so without further ado, to really lead us with her energy, her charisma, her gorgeous beauty, I want to introduce Sharon Reed, who will be moderating our discussion. We intend for this to be lively, for it to be potentially controversial, but we want everyone who attends to get information about what they can anticipate this election season, who they can trust, where they can turn to for information. So we hope that this will spark conversation and interest from all of you. Sharon, without further ado, I hope you'll introduce our amazing all-star panel, and thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Nora, and I appreciate it. You know, when we talk about emotions, elections, that seems to be all the time, but obviously this is, well, unprecedented times. I think we could all agree on that. Our panelists, all-stars, you will recognize them because they bring us that crucial information, it seems, day in and day out. They never stop working on behalf of this community. Pastor Dr. Jamal Bryant, of course, really needs no introduction. Senior pastor, though, at New Birth Missionary Baptist Church. Rashad Richey of the Rashad Richey Morning Show, the hardest working man in radio. Did I get it right, Rashad?
Yeah, that's right. That's
yeah,
correct.
We know it. We know it. Right? Mariela Romero, Univision Communications Regional Community Empowerment Director. Welcome. And also James Woodall, who is a very busy man these days, state president of Georgia NAACP. And I know that, as I said, you've been very busy crisscrossing. I'm sure your phone's ringing off the hook. And I want to start with you. Let's talk about voter trust, because that's really something that's top of mind. Everyone's so suspicious of each other, of the powers that be, if you will. What are you hearing from voters, James?
Thank you for that, Sharon, and to all the panelists and my colleagues in the work and in the ministry that evening. What we're hearing from voters is that, you know, they're tired of things being as though they were. They're tired of seeing the same kinds of policies that are being promulgated day in and day out, year in and year out. And they are tired of waiting in long lines. They want to be able to show up, participate in a democratic process without any kind of obstruction, to be able to cast their vote, to be able to say that this is what I want the future of our community to look like. That's what voters are saying. But what voters are also saying is that they are excited about the future of our community. Because when you have participation from every single category, every single classification, every single community, what you find is that America wins. Our community, our people wins because you have participation from all levels and all sizes and all shapes. And that's, I think, what's the beauty and the promise of this country when we're working together to solve these issues. And so that's what I'm hearing from voters. But we're not going to take that for granted. We're going to make sure we do our jobs to protect the vote, to make sure that everybody has the same access to the ballot box from early vote to November 3rd and even beyond. That's our commitment. That's our challenge, but we're going to get it done.
It's some heavy lifting. We'll say that. Pastor Bryant, I want to go to you now because, you know, some work in an official capacity, right? At the state, the local level, the federal level. You have so many people who trust and respect and really look to you for guidance. But these lines, as James referenced, they're getting so long. We're hearing about machines that aren't working. Are people getting discouraged? Because I've seen people who are standing in line for hours and hours, as we said. What are you hearing?
I am amazed. James and I were in the heart of the city during the uprising about the injustice that is taking place. And we kept hearing disparaging cries against the generation that kept arguing, if you're going to go protest, will you all go vote? Well, Monday, the Lions broke all records of 125,000 people, eclipsing the record from when President Obama ran the first time of 90,000 on that first day, which really gives the evidence that young people are engaged and we know how to make the shift from protest to policy. And so they are frustrated that the wait is long, but they are determined because some have testified they were there 5 hours, 6 hours, 9 hours, but they didn't leave. And I think that that is commitment to the democratic process that is not often portrayed in my mid-range media.
Yeah. Mariela, I guess a simple question for you. What keeps you up at night when you think about the last run, the push to Election Day?
Well, Sharon, this is very emotional for me because, you know, I come from a country, Venezuela, that lived through some turmoil recently, and it all started with one election. One election changed the trajectory of our country. And what I want to bring to my audience is facts and information they can trust. You know, in Venezuela, this happened in 1999, and now the country is in the most incredible, people cannot believe how a country so rich is in the situation that Venezuela is faced right now, with people without any food, no gasoline, when we have the biggest oil reserves in the world, etc. And what happened in Venezuela was demagoguery that took hold of the narrative, and facts were distorted. And that election that changed the whole trajectory of my country was the election that less people participated. And then, you know, corruption, etc., didn't allow the will of the people to be reflected in elections ever since. And what keeps me up at night right now is seeing misinformation being spread through social media, through apps like WhatsApp, that is very prevalent in immigrant communities. And, you know, I've seen information about the coronavirus that is completely false. I've seen information about the policies of certain candidates that is completely false. And the astonishing thing is to see how much people believe in those videos that are created. The technology, you know, is a beautiful thing, but if it is used to create things that are not right, it just serves for the purpose of maintaining us divided. And you know what happens when people are divided. You know, the bad people win when people are not united and when facts are not presented in the right way. So that is what keeps me up at night, and that is why we work so hard at Univision through Univision Contigo, which is our platform for corporate social responsibility. We bring information that is factual to our viewers, to our audience, and we partner with trusted organizations that like PEN America and Galeo and others who are working, to bring correct information.
Yeah, and you know, Maria, so it is a full-time job because there's misinformation is one thing, but the brazenness of it, Rashad, I want you to speak to that because, you know, Mariela references the WhatsApp and the things that are going on to sow discord and misinformation in the Latina community, particularly, but it's all over the place and it's coming from the top. How can we recover from this, both in the run-up to the election to get the information out, but also what happens after? Will it forever be changed? She talks about Venezuela. Are we going to become Venezuela?
Under this leadership is no telling. So let's talk about what's happening with voters first. There's a collective dissatisfaction with dysfunction. This dysfunction connects to a narrative that now we're able to debate facts. Facts are no longer facts. Facts now have the ability to be interpreted. It's a vast difference from when I was director of the Georgia Democratic Party. During that time, we had partisanship, we had battles, we had fights, but there were some things that we all were in agreement with, and they were not up for debate. There's a level of tribalism that has now infiltrated partisan politics in America like we have not seen before, where no longer are we starting from even a premise of politics or a premise of right or wrong. We're starting now from a premise of who believes what. And let me explain that. If Trump believes it, if Trump says it, his surrogates know how to fall in line. Routinely, when Trump tweets something, I get callers on my show the next day, the next morning, basically getting the playbook narrative out to the public. And so they will back his play no matter what, because they're starting from a place of who said it. If the tribal leader said it, then it must be correct for us to say. And there's an indoctrination that we are all collectively experiencing, and it is to our detriment if we don't check it. And indoctrination is when we don't have the ability to critically think about what we believe. And I've seen this on both sides of the political aisle. It's not just Republicans, even though the dogma is stronger with Republicans right now. As far as recovery, I don't know if we will recover from all of it, but here's what I do know. We have to check it every time. I can't get tired just because the president keeps doing it. I can't get tired of talking about it. And I do hear people say, well, Rashad, why do you keep focusing on this? Why do you keep writing about this? Why are you still on MSNBC talking about this? Why not pay attention to this thing or to that thing? Because if you start ignoring the person who occupies the highest position in the country, just because it's customary for him to do these things, if you start ignoring it, it becomes normative. And once it becomes normative, no one actively checks it. And you're starting to see that happen now, Sharon, where there's action from this president that would have been front page news. For example, he's talked about LeBron James. He called him a hater right before he won the championship. He found time to talk about rap artists who he disagrees with. He launched an entire campaign against Colin Kaepernick for peacefully protesting in the most peaceful way imaginable. Colin Kaepernick could not have been more peaceful unless he was sleeping. That's how peaceful that protest was. He launches fights against these individuals, but then when a white militia group is arrested by the FBI for attempting to kidnap a sitting governor, he has no words for that white militia group, showing the display of his support for white militia groups who are willing to overthrow government entities. Now, normally, Sharon, the president not having a voice to stand up strongly against that would be front page news, right? But because of how he has indoctrinated us We no longer expect him to hold a position of leadership against tyrant leaders and thugs like that. And so he gets the ultimate pass. No other president would have gotten the pass to be silent when a group was arrested for terrorism and the president of the United States had no words for him.
Yeah, and I think words matter, right? And indoctrination is the key word. How do we get past this grading on a curve, which seems to be what we're doing? It's really what you're alluding to here. And Pastor Bryant, I'll go to you on that, because you have the nonpartisan approach, right? You have some people on both sides who support, let's say, both candidates at the presidential level. Some of us might wonder, how is that possible? But it is happening. How do you, as Rashad would say, check these issues and speak eloquently and factually about these issues while trying to remain nonpartisan? And can you even do it?
I think you can, as you keep the main thing, is that the church has a responsibility to advance policy, even if we don't agree with personality. White evangelicals have modeled this, that they have completely ignored the behavior of the president because he endorses their policy. So as long as he co-signs against same-sex marriage and abortion, he's our guy. He can disrespect women, he can disparage minorities, he can go off on women, but if he holds on to these two, then we'll dismiss everything else. Sharon, one of the issues mistakes the Black church has made is we've advanced personality without policy. So we go based off of their charisma, their charm, their magnetism, their approachability, but we're not having an ask. The responsibility we're now thrust upon is whether you think Joe Biden is energetic or whether you think that Donald Trump is rude, what do we want out of this? And the generation that James is so elegantly, valiantly leading is now asking the hard questions that the previous generation didn't ask. Where are we with reparations? What are we about fortifying Black businesses? What substantively are you going to do to undergird HBCUs? Why is it that 93% of Black businesses got no PPE support? And so this generation that is going to the polls, they're not wearing buttons for anybody. There are no yard signs. They don't have T-shirts of allegiance. They're going with a clear understanding that this is my act of defiance. So whether I like him or not doesn't matter, but I understand in advancing the cause and pushing forward the community.
I mean, I think you put it so eloquently. I was part of another event the other day, and the person asked me, are you enthused about such and such candidate? And I really said, I appreciate the question, but that's like rich people problems. We're not interested in that right now, right? And the thing about it is, how do you, though, continue and focus and really channel that energy, James, while you fight the misinformation? How do you channel the energy and tell people we have to stay on task here? And as Pastor Bryant said, run down the checklist, because they're holding everybody accountable.
Well, I think it's very easy. And we don't have to channel it at all as leaders, because the people already got that energy. What we are showing up, we saw the entire summer, are young people in the streets during a public health pandemic, putting their bodies on the line. I could have gotten coronavirus pandemic doing some of the work that we were doing. But every time I tested negative. But the fact that we were out there put us into harm's way, because we saw that our bodies were literally being brutalized, murdered, terrorized, violated in every way, shape, or form, from the pandemic to economic unemployment and not having relief, to being able to really walk down the street or run without being fearful of your life. And so what we were saying, young people were saying, was that we were not committed to no partisan affiliation. We didn't have any permanent friends. We didn't have any permanent enemies. We only had permanent interest. And that interest was the liberation and the survival of our people. And so every day we take a breath, we wake up and we say, we are alive. This is an opportunity to get it right yet one more time. That was all the motivation that we needed. Young people all over this country. we don't have to motivate them to understand what's happening right now. They are in the streets right now. And so I think it's important for us to listen to the voices of those people that are found in the margins so that we can lift them up and that we can get the kind of policies that Dr. Bryant is talking about. Prime example, citizens arrest. When we allow the national voices to literally dictate what we're fighting for is when the people in the streets lose confidence in the process. The people in the streets are saying, no, we are tired of symbolic solidarity. We are tired of policies that don't actually address why we are being murdered. What we're asking for is for the statutory obligation of the state to reflect the will of the people, because that's what America promised us. And so what we are committed to doing is fighting, organizing, mobilizing, and building the kind of capacity so that we can support our communities. That's what people are motivated to do. And that does not have anything to do with Donald Trump. That does not have anything to do with Joe Biden. It has everything to do with who we are and who we believe ourselves to be.
Voter suppression, and I want to go to you again, Mariela, and then Rashad, you address it too. How much of voter suppression can be addressed at this stage of the game with lawsuits? And have you ever seen it like this, I guess in the past 30 years, where people are waiting in line, as we said so long, where you have a Secretary of State that is doing pre-election lawsuits to stop the fixing of some of these issues? How much can the courts jump in at this stage?
I don't think the intimidation or the suppression actually can be stopped by the courts right now. It has to be stopped when people are voting. And, you know, since I've been covering elections in the state of Georgia for Univision for the past 10 years, we have seen one form of suppression or another, because, you know, in our laws, you are allowed to bring someone if you don't speak English. And if you're a citizen and you want to exercise your right to vote, you're allowed to bring someone with you to translate and to help you. Or like what happened in Gwinnett County, now you can request a ballot in Spanish. We have, you know, the Latino community through Galeo and other entities, they sue the county for them to have the ballot in Spanish, and they won. But, you know, that was fought in the courts. It takes a lot of time to do so. But I think to fight the suppression is at the moment of voting. And that's why it's so important that we bring to our audience telephone numbers of organizations, nonpartisan organizations that are helping and are able to help people in real time. You can call, you say, I'm not allowed to vote because they're saying my driver's license doesn't match, or they don't allow me to bring someone who can translate and help me read or understand what I'm doing. So I believe that the way to do it is advertising and promoting the organizations that are helping immigrant communities, minorities, people who have been suppressed in the past, helping them right there and there when they are voting. And locally, we have organizations doing that work. And I think it is our duty to, you know, bring those numbers and those attorneys that are helping the community exercise the right to vote.
And we've seen some states, and Rashad, you next, again, sue to take away, you know, people's right to have a translator with them. Rashad, talk radio, you know, Mariela's talked eloquently about the role of broadcasting companies too in this thing to get that correct information out. Talk radio is often viewed as radical, right? On the right and the left. People tune into you in droves every day because they know you're going to get it right. They know you're going to disseminate the information. How much is advocacy a part of that?
I think advocacy is the key. It's much more difficult to hide 100,000 votes than to hide 1,000 votes. And literally, they're not hiding it, they're stealing it. And here's what they're doing. They're creating policy, obviously, to limit how many votes are counted, to limit how many people come to the voting booth, right? And the president said in the last debate, he is setting up the U.S. Supreme Court to be the ultimate vote counter. He said that when asked specifically, will the Supreme Court end up deciding this election, he said, hopefully so. That was his response to that. So let's look at what's really happening. Who casts the ballot is important. Who counts the ballot is important as well. Now, this is going to end up in a court, okay? It's going to end up in multiple courts and likely the U.S. Supreme Court before this is said and done. We've been here before. What happens in that calculation? When you have a massive uprising of citizens throughout this country, you can get something done. You can actually force the hand of government. Here's what we're seeing in our expression of American humanity. America has in her DNA racism and bigotry. It was founded on the concept, not that all men were created equal. That's just what they said. Because when they wrote it, Black men were not considered men. Women, period, were not allowed to have access. Even white men were not allowed to vote unless they owned property. So this country was not written for them to win, for poor, Black, minority, whatever you want to call it. Women wasn't written for that. But this country has free will. This country has an opportunity to abandon its initial design and embrace a design that is equitable and that creates fairness for everyone. When a robber comes in your home, the robber only steals things that are valuable. I hear constantly people call my show, Sharon, and they say, well, my vote doesn't count. Everybody's corrupt. I don't see why I need to vote. We still hear that. And I remind them, if your vote didn't count, why do you think they're working so hard to keep you from doing it? I want you to think about this. You have to show an ID to vote. We didn't have to show an ID 15, 20 years ago. You know why we did not have to show an ID to vote 15, 20 years ago? Because voting is a right. Voting is a right. We all agree that voting is a right. Do you realize that voting is the only right you have where you must present an ID in order to exercise that right? You can legally buy a gun from a private gun owner without the need of presenting an ID to buy that gun from a private seller. Why is that? Because you have a right to own a firearm. You have a right to freedom of speech. You don't have to present an ID to exercise it. That was the first attempt of movers and shakers in the Republican hierarchy specifically in order to limit the voice of those who were poor and disenfranchised. And I'll say this quickly. I didn't realize how many people in Georgia did not have IDs until I was in a position to help people get IDs when that law came into being. We had senior citizens who didn't have IDs. They couldn't find their birth certificate. You know what the Georgia law says we have to do? We have to find their pastor. And we have to get their pastor back when they were born to verify that they were born around this particular date in order to get them a birth certificate, in order to get them an identification. That's in the Georgia code. But it shows you how many people were affected by that changing of the law. But it was a test to see how much we can do as policymakers in order to effect the eventual turnout of the electorate.
And as you know, so many young people who grow up, you know, in foster care, in homes, in all kinds of places where, you know, you don't realize how difficult it is to get these documents sometimes, just to get your hands on the documents. James, back to you, mentorship, because, you know, you mentor people. We lost, though, the great John Lewis, right? And Mr. Vivian, too. How important is that at this point? Because it does seem like these outspoken young people that you all have referenced, they're not just going to do what you tell them to do. They are free thinking, they're demanding, as they should be, and they have their own ideas. The disconnect and how mentorship perhaps can bridge the gap.
Well, when you look at the work of liberation, the first thing that my mentor always taught me was the first step of liberation is to challenge what you thought was normal, to challenge the assumptions that you make about the world in order to make it a better place, because the very assumptions that you make could very well be leading to your demise. And so when he told me, Dr. Christopher Pugh, he told me, he says, your job is not to save the world. You're not Jesus Christ, but your job is to give the world a choice. that if it would prioritize liberation, if it would have prioritized the people over the partisanship, over the political kind of affiliations and the proximities to power that we oftentimes hear about in the mainstream media, but rather it prioritizes those people who are literally suffering and struggling every single day, like my mother was when we were being raised. We talk about mentorship. It's less about trying to convince a person or trying to convert a person or trying to make a person think how you think, but rather to just simply think alone. Dr. Bryant mentioned that majority of people in our communities are not thinking on both sides. It's not a Republican or a Democratic question. It is an American question, that Americans are the most laziest thinkers in the entire world. And so if we were to prioritize the mentorship where the elders were literally mobilizing in ways that allow and challenge the young people to think through these challenges, there's a reason why we think a certain way about political parties, because somebody made the space to think about how we construct this new reality. It has not always been this way. When you think about the Republicans dominating the federal judiciary, it was thought of as an idea, constructed through strategy, to say this is how we're going to implement what they call the Southern strategy back in the 1960s. Somebody thought about those. And so when you look at the movement today, what you see is elders like Dr. Bryant and Dr. Richey and Ms. Romero. They're taking young people and they're challenging their thought process, not giving them the answers to these challenges, because if we're honest, most of us don't really have an answer to how we get it done. But all we're doing is trying to make it work. And so we have to challenge the thought process of what we thought was normal so that we can create a new possibility. That is the work of liberation. But you can't get there if you're just lazy, or if you're not willing to read, and if you're not willing to be challenged and pressed on certain issues and certain assumptions that you make about the world.
I got to push back a little bit, James. I understand what you're saying, but I find the young people who are being, who are at the forefront to be thoughtful, engaged, right down to every detail of what they want, when they want it, and how they want it. Mariela, do you find that, let's compare back to the Venezuela comparison, right? Is the electorate here and the energy here with the youth lazy comparatively?
You know, Sharon, that is a great question. And that is something that worries me because, you know, you have, like you mentioned, you have a lot of youth in leadership positions that are eloquently expressing beautifully what their dream for America, for the future is, where is a future very inclusive and, you know, where the ideals, where this country is founded, you know, it is the promise to fulfill them. So in a way, I'm also in awe of that youth, and I think, you know, we are in good hands. But then, when you see the reality of who shows up to vote, it has been proven that the youth does not go and vote. So I'm hoping that in 2020, and we are doing an enormous campaign in the Latino community, because every minute we have so many Latinos turning 18 and eligible to you know, vote. We are encouraging them to show up this time, but you know, if we go by the statistics, it is not matching, you know, what the passion that we see in them when they are vocal about the environment, about guns, about education, about racial injustice. It doesn't match their participation in the polls. I'm hoping this is the election where we see that the youth is engaged, and I believe that the efforts of so many organizations and broadcast companies is going to pay off, because we are giving that message that they have to show up, and you know, it's the only way in a democracy to be heard.
So you can't argue with history, right? Rashad, Mariela is right. Young people traditionally have not come out and exercised their right to vote. But you know, we are seeing the early numbers already, record numbers out of Texas and our state here in Georgia. Won't this be different this time? Won't it be different? You're muted still, Rashad.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I think it will be different. I don't think young people are lazy. I think they are distracted and disillusioned to a large degree. Every demographic, every age demographic, race demographic, gender demographic, you will have elements of laziness involved in that particular demographic. Here's the reality. We don't let young people, and when I say we, I'm talking about the powers that be in politics, right? They don't let young people in on the transformation. It's almost like we want them to turn 18 just to vote for an agenda that's foreign to them. And once they turn 18, they get the mailers, they get the robocalls, and they get grown folks like me telling them, you must vote because somebody died to make sure you had the right to vote. That's all very true and accurate, but how have we involved them in the conversation of transformation of this country and prepared them for this awesome responsibility of becoming a board member in the United States of America, and they can exercise their board vote once they turn 18 years of age? Have we prepared them for that reality? And one thing that I've done pre-COVID-19 is I would go to high school, and I've been doing this for years, and do voter registration inside of high schools. There's a very little known Georgia law that mandates that every single public high school in Georgia, this is a law, not a recommendation, that every public high school performs one voter registration per academic calendar. That is in the law. The vast majority of schools, even in Metro Atlanta, were not following the law because they were not aware of the law. So my nonprofit sent letters out to all of the school systems, all of the principals, had conversations with the superintendent, and we were able to register students for years under that law. So those are ways we can get them engaged.
Of course you did. Of course you did. You are a man. I do have a follow-up for you because you're young. You're still young, Rashad. So I feel like it's easy for young people to relate to you, even though you're super accomplished and you're out in front. How was John Lewis able to have this connection with young people and energize them and speak that language instead of the disconnect? And how can the rest of us channel that?
John Lewis never fell for the us and them narrative. He never fell for the us and them conversation. You did not hear John Lewis talk about young people in the context of that's them over there. Even when he started his career as a young activist, there was a sentiment in the movement that wanted to make him over here, okay? So he knew what that felt like to be a young activist working toward leadership and relevancy in the movement. And once he became that leader, he knew not to betray the sentiment and the emotion and the feeling of those who were younger and a little more immature. And I'm also reminded of Dr. King because they tried to pit Dr. King against young activists as well in many interviews. He was asked about rioting. And he said, listen, rioting is the voice of the unheard. But they wanted him to be super critical of the riots. They asked him about those who were rioting during pivotal moments of our American political conversation. And he said, listen, the same vigor that you use to denounce the rioters, I need you to use that same vigor to denounce why they're rioting. And so he always had a way to put it in perspective. And I have to remind people that today we celebrate, and I don't condone rioting, but you have to question this. We celebrate the Boston Tea Party as patriotic. The Boston Tea Party gets the benefit of a narrative that calls it a party. It was not a party, it was a riot and a commerce disruption. And that riot and commerce disruption created change to the American government. And I want to put that in perspective, not as a justification, but as a comparison of narratives. Colin Kaepernick, go back to Colin Kaepernick quickly. Colin Kaepernick is unemployed, not because he took a knee. How many young white football players took a knee to pray to white Jesus after they made a touchdown? How many of them took a knee? So it wasn't about them taking a knee. And by the way, that is technically a violation of the NFL rules, and they are fined for doing that sometimes.
And the Supreme Court said that in high school, at least, too. So, you know, we definitely get the comparison. But finish your thought, Rashad. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, and just the fact that Colin Kaepernick took a knee for Black people, right? It was because of who he took a knee for. He took a knee for Black and brown people, and it was because of that. If he would have taken a knee because we needed more money in cancer research, if he would have taken a knee for the Breast Cancer Association, he would not have been unemployed. It's because of what he took a knee for. And then, and I don't mean to criticize my dear brother Jay-Z, but I have to say this. When Jay-Z became a partner with the NFL, and I use that term partner loosely, he's a contract employee. But when he became a contract employee of the NFL, he then said, we are beyond taking a knee. And then after he becomes a contract employee, my dear brother, Jay-Z, successful, and I love him, for the NFL, he said, we're going to fund programs that help with poor people. We're going to fund programs that help with education. Brother, those are good programs, but that's not why Colin Kaepernick took a knee. He took a knee specifically because police officers were killing unarmed Black men, Black women, brown men, and brown women. But you create a program with the NFL that addresses everything but police brutality, and we applauded Jay-Z for changing the narrative.
Pastor Bryant, we can't get away from it, right? And you're another energetic, passionate leader who does seem to be able to connect across all levels and transcend with not just your parishioners, but beyond that. People, they want to hear what you have to say, but they love that you listen too. Tell us more about how we can keep that connection and how you can, I guess, counsel everyone in this time leading up to the most contentious, angry election, perhaps in history.
But Sharon, I got to tell you, I've not heard the last 12 minutes of this conversation. I blacked out after James called me an elder.
You know, I felt a certain, brother, I got to tell you, I felt a certain way about our dear president saying that about me too. I'm okay with being called Unc.
Yeah, no,
But that's as far as I go, man.
I heard Pastor.
Rashad embraced it, but I was like, yeah, I was affirming him the whole time. I'm done with it. I'm going back over on the other side. It is us versus them. This goes in the spirit of unity. I'm finished with it. But I think that the drawing common denominator is authenticity. The reality is that we are now a part of a generation that watches more unscripted television than scripted television. This is the first generation that you can become a star and not have any talent. Just by being seen gives you validation from likes and from a blue check. And so it's the old axiom, don't tell people how much you know, show them how much you care. And so this generation is really just into authenticity. Are you talking about them, at them, or to them? And so they don't mind hearing somebody as old as Rashad or as young as James, as long as the message meets them where it is that they are. They are not impressed that you went to Morehouse or Georgia Tech, but can you really articulate and interpret what it is that's taking place in society and in culture and meet that? So you'll notice, different from John Lewis's time, the leaders of Black Lives Matter are not forced into a demographic of young leaders. They're just called leaders. And I think that that is a gradual shift. We lost 3 in COVID-19, from C.T. Vivian to Joseph Lowry, and of course to John Lewis. And this generation came and took the baton without an Olympic ceremony. That they were able to take it without any adulation, without any praise, or without waiting for it, but they assumed that helm. And so they're listening for those who will speak to them, those who are now holding up in Louisville, Kentucky, Tamika Mallory, my son, the general. Their advisor is Harry Belafonte, who is 83 years old, who, when I was in college, we wouldn't have listened to, and I couldn't have told you what his movies were. But it says that the full circle of life is what it is that you can share, what it is that you can impart, and all the more way you can partner. And might I say, that's probably why the Black church is disconnected, is that it has lost its relatability. The Catholic Church had an explosion of growth when they stopped the entire liturgy being in Latin. When they were able to speak it and sing it and worship in English, then you saw explosive growth in South America, in Africa, in the West Indies, because they would hear what it is that they were listening for. Somehow or another, we've been lost in translation, especially here in Atlanta, that we go back to the sainted days of integrating a lunch counter, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Montgomery, Selma, but we're not talking about Kenosha, Louisville, Mount Vernon, Baltimore. And the young people are trying to see, can you connect the dots, or are you just pivoting away from the dots? So I think what has kept us in the market space is having that relatability without attempting to dummy down or speaking above, but extending a hand to.
Said a whole lot there, Dr. Bryant. James, I'm going to give you a chance to redeem yourself and go back to you. I know you have to get out of here soon. Authenticity, as Pastor Bryant referred to, is that the key? And do you get a lot of pushback? Because obviously there has to be a mission and a mission statement even. What about pushback and authenticity? Are your ears open? I'm talking about the NAACP, because, you know, one of the things I think we fight so much in the minority community, right, Black and brown, is this monolithic label that's often put on us. And I wonder if you could address that.
Most definitely. I want to correct the record that Dr. Bryant and Dr. Richey are not elders, but they are mentors of mine, and I look toward them for wisdom and guidance in this work. I
need you to stop telling people I'm your mentor. Stop telling people that. You done made me an elder. You done, just say I'm your friend. I'm your friend.
That's right. That's my brother in the word.
That's right. We're friends, mentors, iron sharp as iron.
All right, but as it relates to the authenticity question, one of the things in the pushback that we see is that, and it goes back to the first question you asked me, Sharon, about really the thought process of this current generation. What I meant was that when we are challenging ourselves in how we engage the world around us, it's often not received well. And so when you look at when young people are saying, well, we don't want to vote because we don't trust the process, what you also hear is that when we show up to engage in the process and put forth policy solutions, they're often rejected because they are called ideological, they're called nonsensical, they're called unrealistic. For instance, we have Joe Biden on last week talking about, you know, environmental racism and environmental justice, and all the young people that are fighting and organizing around these issues saying we either want the Green New Deal, we want there to be no fracking, but you got the Democratic nominee for president proudly saying he doesn't support these issues. And so it's like, for us, it's a slap in the face. Now, for a lot of us, we understand that we can't lose the forest for the trees. But at the same time, you have some people who are one issue voters who say, if you don't vibe with me on these issues, I'm not vibing with you. I don't care who's in the White House. And so at some point, we have to be willing to allow everybody to show up organically and unapologetically as who they are. And when we all come together unapologetically, what you have is called community. But right now we have an expectation is that when you want us to show up, you want us to show up in the way that you want us to. You want us to show up and say what you want us to say. And that's not what's happening. What young people in the streets are saying is we are done compromising with white supremacy. I understand that there were some compromises made in generations past, and we don't indict them for that. But our generation, we're saying this is what we will not compromise with. This is what we will not accept as normal, and we are going to fight against it. And so that's what you see right now. And people are organizing on that premise so that when we engage and construct a new world of being, that everybody can actually live in it and not be on the margins trying to just make it while everybody else is successful. That's what we're seeing. So I just wanted to lift that up and thank you all for having me on this panel. And unfortunately, I got to ride, but thank you all so much and God bless.
Yeah, thank you so much. We appreciate it, and stay in the fight. Thank you so much, James. Mariela, why don't you pick up where James left off? And I wonder, because we often hear Black and brown. It's always, groups lumped together. How can we appreciate the differences? Because I read an article today, and I've been seeing the stories that in the Latina community, support for Donald Trump, who seems to have done so much that's damaging to, not just Black people, but brown people, Latinos, a lot of people surrounding these issues. How do we speak to those who, through misinformation or just one woman, one man, one vote, they're entitled to it, that kind of support that goes against the very essence of who some would argue we are?
I think it's great that I'm picking up after what James just said, because in the Latino community, we have a lot of people who are disenchanted with the process, because for so long, the issue of immigration, for example, has been promised by both parties, and then it hasn't come to fruition. And it's not like the Latino community only wants immigration reform to be the issue. We are not only interested in passing immigration reform. We want education to be better. We also advocate for healthcare, etc. So it's good that we call minorities come together, their coalitions to be formed, but it is important to understand the things that are important to the different communities. And in that sense, you are absolutely right. We are seeing more support for President Trump from groups of Latinos that, believe the rhetoric of a strong America and closing borders and, America first. And you will think, why? Those Latinos, came here as immigrants as well. That will go against their beliefs, but it's not. And there are some sociological factors. For example, if you look at the history of Latin America, you have a continent that for many, many decades has been ruled by strongmen. So in Latin America, we have seen presidents who have that appearance of strength, and it is in our imaginary of what a president is and how a president behaves. So you will have some Latinos who see that and recognize that it is part of the same things that they saw in Latin America, and then they are enamored with that rhetoric that is very populist, and that attracts that group. Some other Latinos, want the economic factor and the economic talk to be the deciding factor, while we will support a president like Donald Trump. And like James was saying, some people are one issue voters, and you have a lot of conservatives in the Latino community because of abortion. So it is a difficult task for one party like the Democratic Party to talk to everybody and make everybody happy, because they will have to make promises to groups that differ in many issues. Like James was saying, you have now the Democratic nominee not supporting some of the things that environmentalists are fighting for. But, it is very difficult for just one party to have such a big tent. And I think that's why sometimes the Republican Party has been better at articulating a position and attracting a very, very strong group that is not very big, but they are so adamant and supportive of their policies.
Yeah, they're going to show up. Rashad, again, back to the communication and combating misinformation. Again, you do it every day, but it requires trust, right? And I want to know how you cut through that filter with people who have a right to be so distrustful in these times.
You give them the truth on both sides, and you stand as a firm representative of truth and not a representative of a party agenda, because partisanship has disillusioned so many people, especially young people, getting into the political conversation. One of the biggest elements of misinformation is misinformation about what someone has done. We're talking about political leaders. So there's this misinformation campaign that Donald Trump is a criminal justice reformer, right? And you will hear this articulated a lot, especially by Black Republicans. Now, I'm not here to be partisan. Everything I'm saying is a fact. You will hear that Black people should vote for Donald Trump because Donald Trump has done more for criminal justice reform than any Democrat. You
And
will
that
hear
Joe Biden has done the opposite, right? That Joe Biden too has done the opposite.
Right, and that's the other part of the narrative. And so here's how I correct that, because there is context, there is nuance that's necessary. Number one, right now in America, you have more Black people being incarcerated than you have had in recent history, Black and brown. Now, yes, you have an act signed by President Trump, which was a continuation and an enhancement of the Obama Act, which I believe President Obama should have done a better job with. Trump took advantage of it, enhanced it, and made it retroactive so that those who had these extended criminal convictions, extended time for criminal convictions of nonviolent drug offenses could actually have reprieve based on this retroactive act. Great thing to do. However, at the same time, he signed an executive order through his Department of Justice saying basically to prosecute people at the fullest extent of the law for nonviolent offenses. You've also now released police agencies that were under a federal consent decree, where these agencies, these police agencies, were found to violate the rights of Black and brown people. They were under this federal mandate. The Department of Justice rolled back those federal mandates and said, have at it, boys. Go back to doing what you used to do, even though we've documented that your tactics are racist. And let's go to unemployment. That's another element of misinformation that's utilized routinely by those part of the Trump empire, that Black people should be voting for Trump because Trump has created more jobs for Black people than any other president. That number is just untrue. They're talking about a U3 rating system, and the real number comes from a U6 rating system. The rating system that the Trump administration is using says if you work 1 hour during that one survey month, in those 30 days, you are considered employed based on their numbers. That's their U3 rating system that they're using. So if you work 1 hour within 30 days, you're employed. Well, of course, your numbers are going to go up artificially when you use that system. The U6 rating system provides context to the data. The U6 rating system shows that Black unemployment and underemployment before COVID-19 was still at 24%. It also shows, based on that same U6 data that you can get from the Department of Labor, federal government website, that Black people per dollar have been losing money per dollar based on their white counterparts. The number under President Obama was starting to actually become congruent, but the number under Trump, you're now seeing Black workers make less on the dollar than their white counterparts. Now, why is that? Because the Department of Justice decided to say they will no longer prosecute crimes of workplace discrimination as it relates to pay. And you saw a direct impact to Black citizens because of that ruling. And outside of that, you have more employment of folks that can't pay the bills now than in modern history. More people are working 2 or 3 jobs during pre-COVID-19 and now inside of COVID-19 than we had under the Obama administration, the Clinton administration, and even the Bush administration. And so that's providing context to the data, and that's important. And all of my data, you can back up with actual verifiable statistics, usually from the same government websites that they try to spin the data from.
Wow. Pastor Bryant, most of us don't walk around with that encyclopedia of facts in our head. That's just who Rashad is, as you know.
Yes.
How angry are some of the people who come and seek your counsel or just your ear about the current state of things, and just talk to us as if you're talking to them. What do you tell people who feel they're just disenfranchised, that mainstream media is not doing the job and just putting a few black or brown faces on TV is not accurately telling our stories? What do you say to people to get them over the hump, or do you even try? Do you just listen?
I had the privilege of pushing Dr. Joseph Lowry's wheelchair over the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the commencement celebration. I'm pushing him, and he says to me while I'm pushing him, "Your generation ain't done nothing.
Oh, wow.
All you all have done is eaten the fruits from the sacrifice of my generation. I don't understand what you all are doing." And I said to Dr. Lowry, it's an unfair grade because you're not really assessing in the aggregate what my generation is confronting. The fact is, Sharon, my generation has not experienced one victory. The killer of Trayvon Martin is still free. Killer of Tamir Rice is still free. Killer of Sandra Bland is still free. Killer of Eric Gardner, still free. The killer of Trayvon Martin, still free. Killer of Freddie Gray, still free. Killer of Michael Brown, still free. So your generation was able to celebrate incremental victories. So you're able to see the whites only sign come down. You're able to live through going from the back of the bus to the front of the bus. You are alive to watch the witnessing of the signing of the voting rights bill, fair housing bill, the civil rights bill. In my generation is not yet given a bone. And so this is what Bell Hooks calls Black rage. James Baldwin says you cannot have consciousness and be Black and not hold a decibel of rage in you. And so that's why it is that Black people have disproportionate high blood pressure, why it is that we traffic in anxiety, why it is that we're dealing with depression. It's not just about Popeye's chicken. It is that stress that has not been addressed. And so the job of the church is to be holistic, of not just in the business of saving souls, but trying to rescue minds. Sharon, is not lost that African Americans don't know what 10 hours of sleep is. Is that you call your best friend, whoever they are, Sharon, I don't know who your best friend is. You call her up at 11:30, 12, she is up. Hey, girl. And this is not an off night. Nothing strange has happened, but this has become our normative. We think it's strange for Negroes to be in bed by 11 unless they hosting a morning show. We think them is off if I'm just taking a day to unplug, to have self-care. That is alien to who it is that we are. Balance is a foreign integer of just because I'm free doesn't mean I'm available. And so finding that space in COVID, finding my equilibrium in a generation that doesn't practice yoga, that doesn't do breathing techniques. You'll notice that those who have been most maladjusted in the pandemic are Black Christians. There is no rush, Rashad, for the synagogue to open. There is no rush for the temple to open. There is no rush for Hare Krishnas to open. Only the Black church. Why? Because the Black church has only taught corporate worship. We've never taught mindfulness, never taught meditation, never taught how do you pray at home alone, how to do independent Bible study. The only thing we know how to do is turn to your neighbor, shake somebody's hand, give 3 people a high five. And so we have looked at being at home as punishment. So look at what has happened from Greenbrier to Lennox. Is Negroes are going out looking for communion because we don't know isolation. the highest form of punitive damage you can do to a Black man is put him in solitary. They fine going to jail. That's our bar mitzvah. That's our badge of honor. But to go in the hole is something we've not been conditioned for. And so one of the things that we are forced into, can you imagine, Marcia, that we feel put upon in COVID? I read a meme a couple of months ago said our grandparents' sacrifice was going away to war. Our sacrifice is staying at home. So look at what our pain is that we feel it punitive to be at home with Netflix, with Uber Eats, with an iPhone, with more than one bed to choose from. And somehow or another, this is outside of our orbit of what it is that we can handle. And we are anxious about being at home for rent or mortgage we pay. And so the disconnect of who it is that we are and what it is that we're doing is going back to a place of settling in and finding, in the words of Shakespeare, to thine own self be true. So this rage that we're dealing with that has not been met, not been addressed, is having to be forced to be with yourself. And that's what the church is going to have to address. And what I am equipping my team for, the layers of trauma of COVID, not from ventilators. So we're not thinking, Marcia, of those who have been home since March. And my job as pastor is for those who are at home stuck with a molester. We're not thinking about those who are at home and now they are forced to live with a domestic violence perpetrator. We're not dealing with those who are closet alcoholics, but now they have no happy hour to go to. And they're sitting right on their couch going through a six-pack alone. So the church's job when we come back is not just to sing hymn 247, but what do we do for a full mental, social, emotional, psychological, spiritual detox of realizing that it is going to be cathartic to actually hold somebody's hand in prayer, to know that while I'm in worship, somebody is rubbing my back. The things that we have taken for granted that are actually spiritual, that God says in Genesis 3, it ain't good for you to be alone. And so there is no ministry. The church has done a handicapped, disjointed, bipolar approach to ministry. Our singles ministry, Sharon, has been historically, if you in the singles ministry, I'm gonna hook up somebody from the ushers with somebody from the choir. What are we dealing with 5 months of people who've been living at home alone? You know, you're dealing with 3,000 people a week move to Atlanta. They have left home, they've left support system, they've left family, now have no access to church, and they are the only point of connectedness is I'm looking forward to Amazon Prime Day. So Negroes are going in debt buying outfits for events that don't exist. So where are we in trying to declutter all of what it is that we're saying, all that we're imagining, all that we're holding into our own stress? So in dealing with that rage, you got to deal with the rage. Rashad would know the numbers better than me, that 11 million Black people are unemployed in COVID, and that 11 million made less than 28,000 a year. And that 11 million, Marcy, if you can handle it, paid more in taxes than the president. So you deal with that level of rage. What level of rage? I had to do high school graduation virtually this year. And nobody, Sharon, is putting into place that the class of 2020 that was supposed to graduate in May is the same class that was born during 9/11. Wow. So they were born in a national crisis. And now the next critical moment of their life is in a global tragedy. So when you're dealing with the rage, which way does it go? And so it's not just the race card, but it's my personal life. It is those, Sharon, if you can imagine, we go away to school, that now I've graduated, and you know, since you were a junior in high school, all I daydreamed was getting out of my mama's house. Now I can't move into the dorm. I have no roommate.
So, Pastor Bryant,
I'm stuck in a place. Yes.
Boy, you said so much there that it seems that we couldn't see the forest of the trees here, because what you're talking about is a ministry, but mental health. And Mariela, I want to get to Rashad. I know you are out of here in just a few minutes because that's how law school goes. But address that. Is this all not all, not as the cause, but mental health? Is that a way for us, when we address it, to do better, to know better, to become more empowered? As Pastor Bryant he talked eloquently about.
It's ironic you bring that up. Minutes before I came to this forum, I was in an in-depth conversation with my big homie, Lecrae. And we were talking about manhood and how we both have benefited from therapy, right? At 27, and I say this to my listeners, and I've said it on television a couple of times, I did not become a man until I was 27. What happened at 27? 27, I took my little change in my pocket and I paid for a $60 an hour therapist. I had never done such an act. I'm from Glenwood Road. We don't pay for therapists. But I did this because I realized my history as a foster kid, my history as someone who was part of a gang. I was a gangster disciple. My history going in and out of jail. That history damaged me. That reality damaged me. And what did I do in return? I damaged other people. Even when I looked good on paper, I was still damaging other people in my relationships. At 27, I came out of a bad breakup and I wasn't going to get her back, but I needed to get me back. And I paid for counseling. And in that counseling session, that was my first step to acknowledging that I was damaged. All of it wasn't my fault. Some of it was my fault for not getting it taken care of sooner. But in that moment, I started my journey to manhood because therapy created a sense of release and relief from the trauma I had been associated with and became comfortable with as a young man. Now, there's a book. And there's a false narrative about Black people and brown people perpetrated in America. We know that. There's a book that really inspired me when I started my doctoral studies at Clark Atlanta University. And this was recommended to me by Dr. Kua. And Dr. Kua became my dissertation chair. When I completed my doctorate program, him and I, we're good friends today. But this book really transformed some things in me. It's called No BS for Black People by Ivory A. Tolson. And the BS stands for bad statistics. And in this book, it shows you how cleverly others in the media narrative have manipulated statistics to make it seem as if Black people are more violent than any other group in America. And that's why I don't say things like Black on Black crime. First of all, that's a ridiculous point of view because it somehow suggests that Blackness has something to do with crime. Here's the reality. 98% of Black folks that commit crimes against Black folks, guess what they are? They're poor. They're below the poverty line. We're talking about violent offenses against. So this is more of a poverty on poverty situation than a Black on Black situation, but we don't call it that. And white on white crime is statistically comparable to Black on Black crime, but they don't get the stigma of that narrative. And beyond the Black on Black crime stigma to criminalize Blackness in those terms without context, we also have a reality in the structure of law that we are over-policed, over-criminalized, overcharged, over-sentenced, and this has been routine. But let me remind people about my white brothers and sisters. These are just statements of facts. Whites are more likely to commit crimes against family members. Whites are more likely to commit crimes against co-workers. But you have never heard a media narrative that would suggest any of that. Whites are more likely to commit those crimes than Blacks or any other group. Also, Pew Research came out with a research study 2 years ago that, yes, it showed that Black fathers were not as present in the household under what we call traditional marriage as white fathers or Latino fathers, but they were #1 in spending quality time with their children. That was on page 15 of the Pew Research results. That never got a day on mainstream media. I had to read the entire report to find that part of what Black folks were number one in. And so we're fixated on this narrative that somehow Blackness or Black people are more criminal or more sensational toward the negative than any other group. And it is simply not only an unfair narrative, it's an incorrect narrative. And it takes people actually looking at the data and looking at the background and being willing to say to their white friends, Black friends, brown friends, here's what the reality is. And sometimes that proclamation is going to get you looked at differently, but it's worth it. The truth at the end will stand.
You know, I'm drinking all of that in. Rashad, I know you got to run, but that is why your radio show is so important, because that's you. That is why, as Pastor Bryant has talked so much and so great about it, the Black church, the right way, is so important. That's why Univision, Mariela, is so important. And I want you to talk more about that, because it does seem like some of this, the anger is real, and it's okay to be angry given all that we're going through right now, particularly Black and brown people. But is knowing our story accurately, right? As Rashad just spoke to, knowing your story, doing your research so that you can become, I guess, the opposite of indoctrinated, deprogrammed to believe, because, you know, I have arguments with other Black and brown people about this Black on Black crime. There's no such thing, okay? And the link of crime to Blackness and criminality to Blackness is just, it's horrific. But you start to take and drink that in and believe it. So I want you to talk about how we combat that, as, you know, we race to the polls, because there's going to be a November 4th, right? And we're still going to be left with so much of this.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that Pastor Brian mentioned mental health, because our communities really, really need a lot of mental health aid. It is something that I make a topic on my show. Frequently, I bring experts to talk about, because in our communities, we are drinking that those statistics, the portrayals of our people in the media are so negative. Can you imagine? We have to cover for our audience all the atrocities at the border when we see the children taken away from their parents, and then we have to deal also with stories of where those children are located in the trauma. And then we have experts telling us that if those children are not reunited with their parents, their psychological dramas are forever. Their development is going to be stunted. And we are the ones giving that information to our audience all the time and all the time. And, you know, I make a point of bringing mental health experts, because we also have to show another narrative. We also have to show what organizations are helping. And, you know, like Pastor Brian was saying, you know, for our community, the way we really connect is with social gatherings and going to church and las quinceañeras, parties. And it's very, very hard on our community during the pandemic, this isolation. And also, you know, the numbers, the statistics also of domestic violence in the Latino community, and many are forced to live with their domestic partners who are violent toward the family, the children. Molestation is also a problem in our community. And we also have information that many in our community are not going to the police to denounce domestic violence incidents or even rape and molestation, because, you know, we have blended families where one of our family members might be here without documents, and you know, the crimes are not reported because there's another layer of fear, and it is when immigration authorities are called. So, you know, we have that narrative in the media, in what is called ethnic media, the Spanish language broadcasters, and we are perpetuating those, we're bringing those stories to our community, and then in a way is perpetuating those portrayals of Latinos. And I always, you know, talk about mental health, but I also bring examples of people who are living in another situation, who are inspirational and motivational to our community, because it is extremely important to have those images, those examples in our community that can bring some light. You know, it is so important. I remember when my son, he was in middle school, and he wanted me to see the movie, what is it called? The movie is produced by George Lucas, Red Tails. You know, I grew up in other countries, so I never knew that story. And I thought it was another war movie, and I didn't want to watch a movie that was about the Second World War. And my son was, Mom, you have to watch this movie. You have to. And I saw it, and it dawned on me, oh my God, I've never saw a story about African Americans being heroes. And they were heroes. And I realized how important it was, that portrayal. And that happened in history. It was not science fiction. And I said, how many stories are we not telling? And that made me think about the history of Haiti. Haiti has an amazing story.
Incredible.
Of independence. Why we haven't brought that to the movies? Because it's people of color fighting and being heroes. And you know, white supremacy has not allowed those stories to be told. And I think that is extremely important, and we have a role to play in portraying those stories.
I've often said it, and it's not, maybe it is just because I'm on this side of it and you are as well, but the storytelling really is everything. And not just journalism, but Hollywood too. The storytelling's everything. I'll probably get a restraining order. I tweeted and Instagrammed at Spike Lee so much because I want him to bring that story of Haitian independence and abolishing slavery to the big screen. I think it would be so powerful. That's why I keep the King right up there all the time. So final words, because we are out of time. Pastor Bryant, what can you leave us with that? I can't expect you to just heal and send us off with, you know, all positivity, but emotions and elections. We're not going to be able to escape this for weeks, if not months to come, as votes are counted.
Yeah. The old Japanese proverb is the journey of a million miles starts with one step. To know that you are not a sideline heckler, but that you actually went into the voting booth to be a part of the solution. As I opened with it, this is a revolutionary act. An 83-year-old Black man in rural Georgia was interviewed and was asked, why are you voting? And he said, because they don't expect me to. So to go with that kind of bravado and gravitas and inner strength to say, you know what, they took mailboxes from my community, but I'm still going. They took over 2,000 mail sorting machines. I'm still going. They cut the cord so that people couldn't register to vote on the last day in Virginia. Still going. Supreme Court said they're not even counting any more census. Still going. The president says that it's not safe and it's going to be a lot of problems, even though that's unfounded and undocumented. Still going. It's a long line out there. Can't even tell you how long it's going to be. And you got to wear a mask. Still going. I'm out there and they are, let me say this to millennials, while waiting, there are no phone chargers. Still going. And so I think that so many people are going to recalibrate, because the truth of the matter is this. The president administration found itself in office, not because of all the people that voted for him, but for all the people that didn't vote at all. And when you bring that into the aggregate, you realize you did this. You were a part of this. You've got two different mantles. So when you talk about ancestors, people, the average Black person can't name their great-grandmother. They can't name their great-grandfather. We've lost the oral tradition of passing on our family and our history. So if you can't name those, you're going to vote for John Lewis and RBG. You put that into your mind that these are people who didn't die during your lifetime. They died during your pandemic. That you are the only generation alive who has survived a pandemic. Think about your inner strength, that even while it is you didn't follow CDC, World Health Organization, or UN guidelines, God still kept you alive. 217,000 people have died since spring break, and you're not on a ventilator. 7 million people have tested positive, and yet you are free. You were kept alive to restore democracy and make America great for the first time. That has got to be our marching orders for everybody.
Wow. I feel like I had church. I think I did. I can't thank you enough. All the great panelists, and I know Rashad and James had to leave earlier, PEN America, or everyone, NAACP, Atlanta Voice, our partners. Just thank you for allowing me to just listen and ask a few of your questions. I hope we get to do this again, because you're right. The glass, we can look at it, not to oversimplify it, as half full, Pastor Bryant, because there's a lot of work to be done and there's a lot of energy here, and I hope we can harness some of that emotion. I'll turn it over to Tracy and Nora at this point to give us our closing remarks.
Wow, that was phenomenal. I'm Tracy Powell. I'm Program Officer at Borealis Philanthropy, and I so enjoyed this town hall tonight. The headline for me is something that Rashad said, and I don't want to misquote him. I wrote it down. I was a journalist in my past life, so I hope I got it right. He said that we stand on the side of truth, not on the side of a particular political party. That is the very history and mission of the Black press and the Hispanic press. I also want to underscore something that Pastor Bryant said about Black rage and the fact that it is not being appropriately or accurately reported on or reflected in the dominant media at all. And so that's why I want to say thank you to Rashad Richey. Thank you to Mariela Romero. Thank you to Sharon Reed. Thank you to Pastor Bryant. Thank you to Reverend Woodall. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. These are the trusted voices that we can turn to in this sea of disinformation and misinformation. These are the trusted voices. These are the folks, as Pastor Bryant said, that we commune with, that we are in community with. At Borealis Philanthropy, the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund invests in news organizations like the Atlanta Voice, because we understand that these are the folks that you all trust for critical news and information. And I want to thank them for co-hosting this event tonight, and also my co-conspirator, Nora Benavides. Thank you so much to PEN America, and I'll turn it over to you.
Tracy, you said everything, to be honest. I have been sitting here wowed and inspired and humbled to hear everything that you all think, that you are working on. The fact that 2 of our panelists left early to go do other events, to speak with more members of our communities, speaks to the very essence of how committed all of you are. There is so much stacked against our voices, and so much telling us that we don't count, that Black voices do not matter, that Black votes do not matter, that Latino votes and voices do not matter. And so I'm just really thrilled to have come together with our faith leaders, with our community advocates, with our reporters and our media experts, with my partner in crime, Tracy Powell. to give you a sense, we had hundreds of people tuning in tonight. We've gotten so much engagement. I think a spotlight has really been shown on what's at stake this election season. And of course, there are going to be emotions, but we're here for you. We want you to join us in the fight against all of those things that might stack up to prevent you from coming out. So I've put some links in the chat. Check out pen.org. Check out all of our amazing experts tonight. You've said everything more eloquently than I could. Sharon, I want to thank you. You are our sort of unsung hero tonight. You carried it, and we couldn't have done this without you. So to our partners that brought Sharon in from the Atlanta Voice, to Univision, to the Georgia NAACP, this feels like a Latino family reunion, just so you know. And music's going to start playing, but it is everyone. Jamal, you were amazing. I'm going to hit you up now.
Right.
This has been so fantastic. Don't forget James and the Georgia NAACP and Rashad Richey. Thank you all for an amazing evening, and we will be in touch.
And if you haven't already, go vote.
Go vote. Bye, Pastor Bryant.
Thank you.
For your wisdom.
All right. Good to see all of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.